this talk on Demill. You're giving me an opportunity to talk about one of my favorite topics, and I, um, I'm so happy that you're able to join us today. So in March, as most of you know, Canada celebrates International Women's Day as a day to recognize the achievements of women. At the Oshawa Museum, we've made it a point to celebrate and share the stories of women whose voices may be lost to history. Their stories are often told in the records. However, it does take extra effort to uncover and interpret them. With regards to Demill Ladies College, there's much information about the Reverend A.B. Demill, who was the founder of the college. However, the focus of my research and this presentation is the students and teachers of Demill. I wanted to look more closely at who these teachers were, who the students were, what they did after they graduated, and really what was life like for them at Demill. To begin, I wanted to set the stage and just talk briefly about the state of female education in Ontario during the 19th century, particularly females of secondary school age. As women began to attend secondary schools in larger numbers, ladies' colleges provided an alternative to the public school system, particularly for the parents who wanted a segregated learning environment for their daughters. The importance of these institutions in the educational history of women in Ontario is really indicated by the increase in well-funded female day and boarding school province. In the 1860s, there was probably one or two of these really big boarding schools, but by the mid 1880s, there were 7 or 8 of them. The wealthy class could always afford tutors for their daughters, but for the middle class, the ladies' colleges growing in the province were a viable alternative. During the 1840s and 50s in Oshawa, there were at least 3 private ladies' schools catering to the middle class. And when I say private schools, they weren't very large. They were just maybe one teacher looking after a few students. We know of a Miss Wheeler, who was a graduate and former teacher at the Burlington Ladies Academy. She left her position as a school teacher to operate a ladies' boarding school. By all accounts, Miss Wheeler's school was well regarded. And in 1851, she's reported to have 95 girls on the school roster studying subjects such as grammar, writing, geography, and history. Very little is known about the other early lady schools in Oshawa. We've heard of a Miss Leonard, who's a pianist, and she was running a small school at one point. And Mrs. Damon's school was based on the English Dame school system and offered lessons in things like sewing and manners. So this is, on the left, you can see an advertisement for a ladies' school. And this is from the Whitby newspaper, approximately in the 1850s. And you can see some of the things that they're teaching: reading, writing, arithmetic, grammar. It followed a lot of what they would see in some of these other schools, the public schools. However, they also taught on the side things like art and music that you normally didn't see in a public school. Demill Ladies College opened on February 1st, 1876, with 80 students in attendance. The school was a large and commodious building, according to Demill's school calendar, supplied with all the modern improvements in heating, lighting, and ventilation. The school's 20 acres of land were perched on a hill in South Oshawa, giving a commanding view from all sides. On the south is the broad expanse of the blue waters of Ontario. On the east is a splendid view of Oshawa with its fine manufacturing establishments. And on the west and north, an extended prospect of the country with beautiful valleys and sloping hills, and beautifully dotted with the homes of farmers, all of which present a most enchanting scene. So reading that, why wouldn't you want to send your daughter to this wonderful school? This is a wonderful lithograph that we received from Ernst & Young a few years ago. And this doesn't show Demill as it was. It's showing the school after the addition that Demill wanted to put on his school. We don't really know how much of the addition actually got built. There's a lot of gaps in the history, but we're still working to uncover that. But you can see it would have been a fabulous large school. Because we don't have any photographs of the interior of Demill Ladies College, I used some photographs from the Thomas Boakley collection, courtesy of the Robert MacLaine Gallery, to illustrate what the schoolrooms might have looked like at Demill. This is Bishop Bethune College. A few years after Demill, this is about 1926, but from some of the descriptions I've read of the Demill Rooms, I would say that they're pretty similar. So I wanted to talk briefly about what would a typical day at Demill Ladies College be like? What would it be like for the girls that were living there? One of the things that Demill was adamant about is that all students had to board at the school. He did not allow any day pupils because he thought they would bring village gossip and distractions into the school. Rooms were described as suitable in size and contained all necessary furniture, including a wardrobe. There was running water in the areas where rooms were located, and Demill proudly touted the school was heated by hot air and water, making every room the same temperature. The school was also equipped with gas lighting in the public rooms. Students were expected to supply their own towels, table napkin and ring, one pillow and pillowcase, a pair of sheets and bed covering, a knife, fork, teaspoon, all to be marked with the students' names. Clothing was meant to be neat, plain, and inexpensive, and must be brought from home. Cultivation of the mind was the goal, said Demill. Shopping for clothing took too much time. Although the school was non-denominational, girls were encouraged and indeed expected to attend religious services of their parents' choosing, accompanied, of course, by a teacher. Morning and evening worship was held at the college, as was daily Bible lessons. Students were expected to furnish the school with a list of correspondence signed by their parents, and this list was to be strictly adhered to. No visitors were allowed on the Sabbath. Friday evenings and Saturdays, students could receive calls from friends named by their parents and sent to the lady principal. Frequent calls from home weaken the resolve of the student, thought Demill, and it hinders them in their studies. So he discouraged them. Eatables sent from home were considered evil in many ways, and they would be returned if sent. This is a wonderful picture we have of a calisthenics class of probably in the late 1880s, early 1890s. Each day, students were expected to spend time outdoors. Longer walks were taken twice a week with teacher supervision. Calisthenics was given twice weekly, and the girls wore a suit made of navy blue flannel with a blouse waist and a short full skirt trimmed with white braid. And I have a little chuckle when they call it a short skirt. You can see the ankles are showing in that one girl in the second row, but certainly not considered a short skirt. I love this photo too, because if you look closely, you can see the girls are holding some of the equipment they use in their calisthenics classes. So they've got some walking sticks. They have, it appears to be almost like a javelin, but I think they used them to throw, and there's a couple holding some balls, shot put, I see, things like that. It's a wonderful photo. From the very beginning of the college, Reverend Demill emphasized the domestic role the girls would assume upon their graduation. He stressed the education at Demill would properly prepare girls for this role. He suggested unhappy households were the fault of women because they lacked specific domestic training. He claimed 90% of girls returning home from boarding school were useless. Demill's idea was to include domestic training at the college level because he felt domestic training and this education would complement one another. The home influence, the domestic knowledge with the necessity of being able to do all that is necessary in a well-kept home can be so interwoven in the college training, said Demill. As students performed the necessary domestic chores at the college, they were gaining meaningful experience in running a household, and thus, combined with their courses in domestic economy, digestion, food, health, and habits of life, ensured students were adequately prepared to assume their roles in the domestic sphere. The domestic work consisted of waiting on tables and tidying up at the school, not to take more than 15 minutes a day, claimed Demill. I always wondered how well this philosophy worked in the school and how receptive the students were to assisting in this respect. Recently, I came across a clue that perhaps some of the students were not happy about the idea of performing the domestic chores necessary to keep the school operating. In the fall of 1879, just 3 years into its existence, newspaper reports of a student strike at the school started to appear. As noted in the news brief, the students stopped short and never more were they going to wash the dishes necessary for the successful running of the institution. The unrest appears to have roots in the fact that some of the young ladies who were more advanced objected to the rudimentary branches of washing dishes in which they claimed they were already proficient. The story of the Demill strike appeared in newspapers across the U.S., including Ohio, Nevada, California, New York, Massachusetts, Kansas, and Indiana. Students at Demill came from all over Canada and the U.S., leading me to think that this was not the kind of publicity that Demill would have wished. The strike seems to have been short-lived, as there's no further reports in the newspapers, and Demill did not appear to adjust his educational philosophy to any great extent. Interestingly enough, in November 1879, the Montreal Daily Witness reported an unnamed ex-student of the Ladies College writing to them to say stories of a strike were untrue and merely rumors. The ex-student claimed she was not opposed to the system of education, and the idea of a strike existed in imagination only. So what the true story is, we don't really know. It crossed my mind that possibly Demill might have planted that letter in the newspaper about the stories of the strike being untrue, but you never know. It's just a thought on my part. So what did they actually study at the school? It was the broad scope of the curriculum, which, according to Demill, was the one feature which made his school unique in the Dominion. Similar in nature to the curriculum at the ladies' colleges in other parts of the province, Demill offered study in academic and collegiate streams combined with a liberal dose of ornamental study if desired. There was also a preparatory stream for students who were not yet qualified to study at the collegiate level, and that included study in English grammar, composition, penmanship, and Canadian history. Studies in the academic stream would also add courses in bookkeeping, elocution, scripture history, analysis, and geography. The collegiate program was 3 years in length and included many of the courses mentioned, but also Latin, French, algebra, physiology, zoology, literature, astronomy, logic, ancient history, natural theology, evidence of Christianity, and scripture history. Senior students could also add studies in geology, chemistry, moral science, and modern history. The textbooks used were the same as in the public school system, such as the Potts Euclid and Harkness Latin Reader. Degrees conferred at Demill were Mistress of Liberal Arts and Mistress of English Literature for studies which were confined to the English branch. By 1887, which is the latest year for which we have graduation information. Demill had graduated 18 students, of which 7 had Mistress of English Literature degrees. Extras were defined as music, including vocal and instrumental, drawing, and painting. Diplomas were awarded in instrumental music and harmony, vocal music, instrumental music combined with art and elocution. Graduates of the music department were assured that upon completion of their 3-year course, they were ready to assume teaching duties or proceed with more advanced instruction in the European conservatories. Now, full tuition at Demill was about $160 for the year. Music tuition was an additional $8 a term, and there was 4 terms a year, plus $2 a term if you wanted use of the piano for 1 hour a day. Drawing and painting were an additional $6 a term, and the art department was affiliated with the Ontario School of Art. Demill also had rates for students that just wanted to pursue music or fine art education. To graduate from the music program, students were required to take an examination in harmony and theory and give a recital, either vocal or instrumental. Several times a year, concerts were held where students could showcase their talents. Here we have a couple of programs of Christmas concerts that the Demill College students would put on for the town. Demill students received many accolades in the local press whenever they hosted recitals or art exhibitions. And we see sometimes in the newspaper little write-ups that it was quite a good concert at Demill. Girls were required to take the academic subjects, such as reading and math, but added to this was training in various ornamental subjects, including needlework, French, art, and music. Ornamental subjects, it was suggested, were designed to prepare women for roles within the domestic or private sphere as homemakers, wives, and mothers responsible for the moral being of society. The ornamental or accomplishment branches of study, as defined in the college calendar for 1881-1882, included these courses of study along with all of the more solid practical subjects. However, ornamental instruction was not allowed to interfere with other subjects of greater educational importance, said Demill. The purpose of ornamental work was to furnish pleasant employment for many half hours, which may otherwise be wasted. Tuition was based on study in all the English branches, French, German, waxworks, and fancy needlework. Fancy work was taught each afternoon, but as I said, it was not allowed to interfere with more important subjects. It merely kept the hands busy during time that might have been wasted. And here we have an example of some of the work that was done at Demill. On the right, you'll see student, her name was Floss Mary, and she attended Demill in the 1890s. She may have attended in Oshawa and at the St. Catherine's School, so she kind of bridged the 2 schools. But her family donated this lovely pillow, and it is some needlework that Floss Mary did while she was at Demill. The college attracted from all over the province and Canada and the United States. Surviving class lists detail a student body representing towns and villages in New York, Kentucky, Louisiana, Michigan, and the Northwest Territories. Unfortunately, little is known about the girls who attended Demill. However, we have recorded all the names from the surviving school catalogs and graduation lists. So at present, we have the names and hometowns of over 350 Demill students. Although the school did not accept day students, there were 6 girls listed in the 1881 calendar as being from Oshawa. 3 of those girls were well above the minimum entrance age of 16. Mary Hancock was 19, Florence Carswell was 21, and Letitia Annis was 22 and in her first year of the collegiate program. This was not unusual, for young girls were often taught at home and then in their early teens were sent to school for as short a time as a term or even as long as several years. You might recognize a couple of those names. Carswell, Florence Carswell's father was an orator and a well-known prohibitionist. And Hancock and Annis were longtime residents of Oshawa. Mr. Thomas was a stage proprietor, and Mr. Annis was a farmer. One of the stories I wanted to share with you today was that of Henrietta Augusta Wawanoosh Wells, known as Gussie in the Demill records. She was the third child born to Chief William Wawanoosh and Mary Waldron. The marriage was interracial, with her father being the first elected chief of the Amjinnan First Nations, was formerly the Chippewas of Sarnia, and her mother was the daughter of a white missionary. Wells was the family's anglicized name. Upon graduating from Demill, Gussie applied for enfranchisement. Enfranchisement of Indigenous peoples meant the loss of their, in quotes, Indian status, and with that their treaty and statutory rights as Indigenous people. Upon enfranchisement, the individual gained full Canadian citizenship and no longer had the right to live in the reserve community. Essentially, it worked alongside residential schools to eradicate Indigenous cultures. When applying for enfranchisement, the Indigenous applicant had to demonstrate that they were, again in quotation marks, civilized enough to live within the European concept of private property. Enfranchisement would be granted if the applicant had served in the armed forces, graduated from university, or in the case of most females, married someone who had already left the reserve or was non-Indigenous. Records held at Library and Archives Canada show that Gussie used her degree, Mistress of English Literature, obtained at Demill in 1891, as proof of her worthiness to be granted enfranchisement. It was relatively rare for an Indigenous person to apply. In fact, from 1876 until 1920, only 250 Indigenous people successfully applied for enfranchisement. Harriet Augusta Wawanoosh Wells was one of those 250 to successfully apply for enfranchisement, based in part on the diploma awarded to her from Oshawa's Demill College. Many of the students at Demill appear to come from well-to-do or prominent families. Rebecca and Agnes Edith Livingston of Baden in Waterloo, near Waterloo, Ontario, attended Demill in 1883-1884. They were the daughters of Ontario industrialist James Livingston, who operated a flaxseed business and served as a member of provincial parliament and in the House of Commons. Rebecca and Agnes seemed to enjoy their time at Demill, for in a letter to their father, Rebecca states, "I think I would rather stay here than go to a strange school, being that we are acquainted and some students come not far from home." Unfortunately, both girls died fairly young. Rebecca in 1895 at age 27 and Agnes in 1899 at age 30. Their family home is now a museum. The home was in the family from 1877 to 1988, and it's known for its trompe l'oeil, hope I pronounced that right, trompe l'oeil murals. Trompe l'oeil is a French term which means to fool the eye. This illusionistic painting technique is employed in many of the decorative ceiling and wall paintings found throughout Castle Kilbride. Evidence of the three-dimensional technique was a central reason for Castle Kilbride's designation as a National Historic Site in 1995. These interior paintings are one of the finest examples of skillful artwork in a domestic home from the mid-Victorian era in Canada. Found within the paintings at the castle are a number of hidden images and classical motifs. So if you're ever in the area, I would recommend stopping in at Castle Kilbride. It's really quite an interesting museum. And now that you know there's a connection with Demill, the staff there loves talking about the girls' time at Demill. Some of the Demill attendees pursued roles in the public sphere after their education. Jenny M Simpson attended Demill for 3 years in the early 1880s, and in 1884 she entered the College of Dentistry at the University of California. Dr. Simpson practiced dentistry in San Francisco for a number of years and held the position of visiting dentist to Children's Hospital. And at the very bottom line there, you see Jenny's registration as a dentist in the College of Dentistry. And in the upper right, I've managed to find a nice advertisement for Jenny's business, her dental practice in San Francisco from one of their directories. Blanche Lehigh MacLaine spent a number of years at Demill starting in 1886, and she graduated in elocution in 1892. Blanche continued her education at the Toronto Conservatory of Music, where she received a voice degree, after which she moved to Nova Scotia to teach elocution and calisthenics at the Halifax Ladies College. She later became Dean of Women at Acadia University. The moral discipline characteristic of an education at Demill greatly impacted Blanche for the rest of her life. And according to her biographer, she conducted herself according to these strict moral principles. Blanche's famous grandchildren, Warren Beatty and Shirley MacLaine, were both influenced professionally and personally by their grandmother MacLaine. Beatty and MacLaine's great aunt, Kate Lehigh, also attended Demill, where she studied music and later became a piano instructor. And to this day, there is still a Blanche Lehigh bursary in the sum of $525, which is awarded at Acadia College to a woman in residence. And it was given to the college by Blanche's son in memory of his mother. So now you know the connection that Warren Beatty and Shirley MacLaine have to Demill Ladies College. Another component of the superior education available at Demill was the emphasis placed on the hiring of good quality teachers. Demill asserted that even though tuition was low, he was able to secure the finest teachers. Several had been educated at Mount Holyoke Seminary in Massachusetts, which was the first of the 7 sister schools and a leader in female education during the 19th century. Many of the teachers seem to have been recruited shortly after graduation. Demill touted their qualifications in the school's annual calendars. For instance, Miss Howland was a teacher of the classics and later became principal at Demill. She was a Holyoke graduate, and this, according to Demill, was in itself proof of her qualifications. Harriet Hinman and Mary Warner were also 2 other Holyoke graduates, as was Mary Sawyer. Even with this impressive list of accomplishments by the faculty, some people in town still expressed serious doubts as to the quality of the teaching staff. The Oshawa Reformer newspaper said salaries paid by Demill were too low compared to the public school system. They said they learned what low salaries got us in our high school, and they were efficiently taught by more competent teachers than was possible to be had for the salary given at the tutors in this establishment, which they quoted as being $150 a year plus room and board. Considering a female teacher in Oshawa was paid a wage of about $280 per year, in 1873, the wages paid by Demill were not that low if board and room were included. Despite the reportedly low pay, several teachers were employed for long periods of time at the college. And here is a advertisement from the Ontario Business Directory that Demill put in for 1888-89. And you can see in bold there, he's talking about his able staff of teachers. Abby Howland was one of the graduates of Mount Holyoke's class of 1876. She taught classics, logic, metaphysics, English literature, and calisthenics at Demill for a number of years. Eventually, she became the associate lady principal. In one of her class letters, dated 1882, Abby reflects on her life at Demill. She states, "We've had a very happy school here, we all think. We've plenty of hard work to do and much responsibility to bear. Nor are we free for the many anxieties and perplexities which naturally attend a teacher's life." Dr. Mary Sawyer was from the class of 1879 at Mount Holyoke, and she taught at Demill for at least 5 years. She taught physics and chemistry at Western College and Seminary and was appointed Dean of the Western College for Women in Ohio for 25 years. That school eventually merged with Miami University, and to this day there still is Sawyer Hall on campus. She was honored with 2 honorary doctorates, one from Western and one from Miami University. The 1920 Western College for Women commencement was dedicated to her on the occasion of her retirement, and she was presented with a trip around the world. The trip was lengthened by 2 years when she temporarily came out of retirement to serve in Nanking, China, where she stopped to visit some of the Western College students. The end of Demill Ladies College was foreshadowed in the Ontario Reformer. It will readily be seen that unless some great and unforeseen calamity befall it, there is a brilliant future in store for this school. The school operated in Oshawa for 20 years and had an outstanding reputation. In April 1896, we're coming up to the 125th anniversary of this fire on April 6th. A fire destroyed the college, while fortunately the students were on Easter break. Says Demill of the event, "On my return to the college, seen my gaze such as I hope to never see again. The institution, which had been almost as much to us as our existence, lay in ruins." Fortunately for the students, Demill was able to salvage the school year by moving operations to his Toronto facility. Although the town of Oshawa encouraged Demill to rebuild the school, financial considerations made it more feasible to secure a building already erected. After visiting several cities and towns, Demill made the decision to move the college to St. Catharines, where it occupied the former sanatorium building known as Stevenson House. And this is the only picture I've been able to find of Demill after the fire. So this was taken, according to Demill, the day after the fire ravaged the buildings, and you can see it was pretty well a total demolition of the building. And this is from Demill's book, In the Net. One of the driving forces behind female education in the 19th century was the idea of distinct spheres appropriate to men and women. The women's sphere was viewed as being in the home as a homemaker, wife, and most importantly as a mother. It did not usually include paid employment opportunities. The emphasis placed on teaching by schools such as Demill and others clearly indicates there are some notion of preparing for a vocation on the part of the girls, if not their parents. Study music, art, elocution, or modern languages could also be considered employable skills leading to teaching opportunities. The amount of time devoted to teacher training classes and the suggestion of work in the art field indicates there must have been a demand for this type of training from the middle class. The further training opportunities available to graduates from these colleges also indicates that at least some of the girls were not marrying immediately upon graduation, and they would be expected to work. Although advertised as academies supporting the traditional private sphere of female domesticity, in reality, these schools could also be considered as important training venues for females to assume public roles if they desired. So if anyone has any questions, I would be glad to take those. I don't know, Jill, if you got any